All right, we all know buying a home is crazy expensive, but what if I told you the seller could actually help you pay for a big chunk of it? Yep, that's where something called seller concessions comes in. And trust me, getting a handle on the rules can literally save you thousands of dollars. So let's dive in and break it all down.
So you're out there looking for a home, right? You've saved up for the down payment, you're feeling good, and then, bam, you get hit with closing costs. We're talking about all those extra fees, appraisals, title insurance, loan stuff that just seem to pop up out of nowhere. It's a huge surprise for so many people, and it can easily add up to thousands of dollars you just didn't plan for.
But here's the thing. There's a powerful tool that can help with that. What if you didn't have to come up with all that cash at once? What if you could just roll those costs into the loan itself? Well, you can, and it's a game changer when it comes to negotiating your offer.
And that tool is called a seller concession. It's actually pretty simple when you break it down. Basically, the seller agrees to pay for a portion of your closing costs. Now, how does that work? Well, that amount usually gets baked into the final sale price of the house. So instead of you paying all that cash out of pocket on closing day, you're financing it over the life of the loan. It's kind of like getting a cash credit from the seller right when you need it most.
Okay, that sounds amazing, right? But of course, there's a catch. You can't just ask for an infinite amount of money. Lenders have really strict limits on how much a seller can actually contribute. And to make it even more interesting, those rules change completely depending on what kind of loan you have. Now, this chart might look a little complicated at first, but don't worry, this is basically our cheat sheet. We're going to use this as our guide and break down every single piece of it, so it all makes perfect sense. And we're going to start with the loan type most people get. All right, first up, conventional loans. These are the ones you hear about most often. And for these, there's one golden rule you have to remember. The amount of concession you can get is directly tied to how big your down payment is. Yeah, it's basically a tiered system. The more skin you have in the game, meaning the more money you put down on your primary or even a second home, the more you can ask the seller to chip in. So let's get into the actual numbers. Okay, so for the first level, if you're putting down less than 10%, the seller can kick in up to 3% of the sales price to help you out. Not bad. But watch what happens when you just cross that 10% line. Boom. The second you hit a down payment between 10 and 25%, that concession limit literally doubles. We're talking a full 6% now. That's a huge jump. And for the big one, if you're able to put down more than 25%, you max out the scale at a massive 9%. You can really see it here, right? A bigger down payment gives you so much more firepower when it's time to negotiate those closing costs.
Okay, but that's all for a home you're going to live in. What happens if you're buying an investment property? Well, for a conventional loan, the lender sees that as a bit more risky. And believe me, the rules get a whole lot stricter. Yeah, you can just throw that whole tiered system right out the window. For an investment property, it's a flat 2%. That's it. Doesn't matter if you put down 15% or 50%, the max is 2%. That is a massive difference you absolutely have to keep in mind.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about government-backed loans. We'll start with FHA loans. You've probably heard of these. They're super popular, especially with first-time homebuyers, mainly because the down payment requirements are so low. And you know that whole complicated tier system we just talked about for conventional loans? FHA says forget all that. They keep it super simple. It doesn't matter if you put down the bare minimum of 3.5% or if you put down 20%. The rule is exactly the same for everyone. And what's that simple rule? A flat 6% maximum contribution. That's a really generous number, especially for buyers who are just getting into the market. It's all designed to make getting into a home just a little bit easier. Okay, now for two other government-backed loans that have some truly unique and honestly powerful perks. We're talking about VA loans for our veterans and active duty military, and USDA loans, which are for homes in more rural areas. Let's be clear, the VA loan benefit is just in a league of its own. It's incredible. First off, a seller can pay for all 100% of your closing costs. There's no percentage cap. But wait, it gets even better. On top of that, they can chip in an extra 4% that you can use to pay down other debts you might have, like a car payment or a credit card. I mean, come on, that is an absolute game changer for our veterans. And then we have USDA loans. This one's super easy to remember because it's exactly the same as an FHA loan, a simple, straightforward 6% maximum concession. Easy. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the limits, the percentages, the rules, but what can you actually use this money for? It's not like the seller just hands you a blank check. The funds have to be used for very specific costs related to closing the deal.
So that seller contribution can be used for three main buckets of expenses. First, you've got your standard closing costs. Things like lender fees, title fees, that kind of stuff. Second, it can cover prepaid items. These are things you pay for in advance, like your property taxes or homeowner's insurance. And third, you can use it to buy discount points. That's an optional fee you can pay to buy down your interest rate for the entire life of the loan.
Phew. Okay, I know there was a lot of numbers and a lot of different rules, so let's pull it all together into one simple cheat sheet that you can come back to anytime. And here it is, your at-a-glance summary. For conventional loans, just remember that 3, 6, or 9% ladder. It all depends on your down payment. For FHA and USDA, it's a nice and easy 6% flat rate. And then there's the incredible VA loan, where the seller can cover all your closing costs plus that extra 4% for your other debts. Simple as that. Look, just knowing these rules is half the battle. It's the first step to playing the game well. It really transforms you from just being a hopeful buyer into a savvy, strategic negotiator. Now you can craft an offer that not only helps you, but also makes sense to the seller. So now you know the maximums, right? You know the limits. The big question is, how much should you actually ask for? Well, that's going to depend on the house, the local market, your specific financial picture, and, my friends, that is where the real art of the deal begins.